We will, I am very confident, finally finish up our discussion on Introduction to Business Processes and launch into our discussion on enterprise systems today. And where we left off when we were last together was looking at this slide and talking about this idea of SAP is broken up into modules, and this is not an exhaustive set of those modules. These are the 12 kind of most common. You could probably make the case that they are the core modules, but this is certainly not all of the different acronyms and abbreviations that you would see in the SAP ecosystem, as illustrated by the fact that last time I talked about COPA, where PA was profitability analysis, and PA is not one of the two-letter acronyms that is there on the screen. For modules, it is somewhat traditional for them to be described with two letters in this fashion. And I can tell you from personal experience, it often is very challenging when you are talking with SAP professionals, watching webinars, reading materials. Sometimes it really, it's alphabet soup in trying to, sometimes sit there saying, okay, what does these two letters stand for? And sometimes you don't really know for sure, but you think from the context you can kind of decode what it probably is. And you wind up doing a lot of that. But these are ones that you certainly will see a lot. And along those lines, I'm just hypothesizing here. I'm not telling you for sure this would happen, but this could be a really good matching section on a quiz or a test where I would give you 4 or 5 of these and then a description of them and ask you to match which abbreviation goes with which. And I probably would be careful not to put asset management on the right and AM on the left. I would describe it as opposed to just allowing you to use your keen observational skills and observe that asset management and AM seem to have something in common. So we talked about FI, financial accounting, which that's our external accounting focus. CO, cost accounting, controlling, managerial accounting, that's the accounting that we largely do for our own benefit. AM, we said, was asset management, and I didn't put this on the slide here, but I did mention it in the last 30 seconds of class, so I'm sure all of you remember what I said. What's one example of kind of one of the key elements in asset management? What's that? Plant could be a part of it, absolutely. But what is another key focus of asset management that relates to accounting type things? What's that? That would go with human capital management. So that's a different cell up here. But what do accountants do with equipment? They don't run it or operate what? Depreciation. So depreciation would be an example of what we're talking about here when we're talking about asset management. It's all the different things that we do dominantly from an accounting perspective to account for our fixed assets. And I bring that out because the actual fixing of equipment is a different module up here that we'll get to in a few moments. So asset management in this regard is the management of assets from an accounting perspective, which is pretty non-trivial for a large operation that has lots of equipment, trucks, vehicles, plant equipment. That could be several people's full-time jobs to focus on things related to asset management. PS is, let me get my pen working here. PS is, I think my pen just needs a few moments to wake up in the morning or something here. Well, I can scribble, but I can't write. There we go. Project systems. And this is the project management component I talked about before. We can use this for any kind of project management. This could be, something that we're doing that's, we're going to plan a big celebration. and a lot of people are going to be involved in that, and we're going to have lots of milestones. We can use it in that sense. Project systems also sometimes has to deal with manufacturing of products or resources that take an extended period of time. And the example I think I used last time was like the building of the football stadium here on campus. That's going to take an extended period of time. There are going to be a wide variety of tasks done by a lot of different people, and somebody needs to coordinate that. We need a project plan. The project systems module allows us to do that. WF, this is an interesting part of the system. WF stands for workflow. You will see a lot of demand for people that know SAP workflow. It is not necessarily complicated, but it is its own animal with its own different way of interacting with the SAP system. What is workflow? Well, in a typical organization, there will be lots of situations the company will create. For example, they might say, okay, for an employee that wants to take vacation days, you have to get the approval of your supervisor. And if the supervisor approves it, then that information gets sent to HR so that they can make sure that the employee has vacation days available. And then once HR approves it, they send that information to payroll and they update the record keeping related to that. And then the employee is notified that yes, you can take those vacation days. What I have just described is workflow. And what you want to do in an organization is make that as easy as possible. Well, workflow allows us to go into the system and create these different workflows and make it so that an employee who wants a vacation can log into the SAP system, assuming they interact with SAP directly, and run a transaction that gives them a calendar. They can pick the days they want off. They click a button, and then an email gets sent to their boss saying, such and such an employee would like off next Thursday. Do you approve, yes or no? And the manager can, working right from his or her mobile device, click yes. And at that point, the employee gets notified, your manager said yes, the request is now being forwarded to HR, and that happens automatically. And then once HR says yes, then payroll gets notified. Basically, the whole thing happens as quickly as we can make it happen, with the computer making sure that all of the communication takes place and makes all of this happen as smoothly and as quickly as possible. That's workflow. That is something that a lot of companies rely on in a lot of different contexts. An employee needs to take a trip, so they have to arrange travel. Many companies have travel offices. So the employee puts into the system, I need to go to Chicago, I need to get there next Tuesday, and I need to be there through Friday. And they put that into the system, and then people in the travel office start making reservations and other things like that. And everybody in the company that needs to know is notified about this. Setting up those workflow processes is the job of the workflow module. And you don't need necessarily a huge number of developers focused on this, but knowing how to do workflow is a key element in a lot of companies' operations. IS is information systems. Information systems in this context largely is talking about the reporting focus of the ERP system. And in fact, most of the other modules that you see here have information systems as a part of that. For example, the workflow module might allow a manager to create a report that would list all of his or her employees and when they're planning to go on vacation in the next 6 months. That kind of report would actually be generated by the information systems module, although it's going to be obviously very tightly integrated with some of the other functional systems here. HR, that's a pretty easy one. That's human resources, and That is a very commonly used module among HR professionals, and so you will see a lot of demand for that in job listings. I think I made mention last time of the fact that HR is another one of those modules that really is very different than everything else in the system, and so it being its own kind of distinct color there is really quite fitting. Yes, sir. It can manage as much or as little of that as a company chooses to employ. It can literally do everything from the company says we need new employee, so the job description is developed in the HR module. It's pushed out to a website automatically. When people apply, they might fill out a web form, but all of their information goes into the SAP ERP system. The employees are ranked, or the potential employees are ranked in the ERP system. People are notified that they didn't get the job. You know, all of that can be pushed onto the system here as companies desire to do so. Now, that is also a space where there are a lot of other companies that make systems that might be more sophisticated and match up more with the demands of our given industry. So it would not at all be unusual for a company to run SAP HR for the sake of things like payroll, but do recruiting and employee management through a totally different software package that may or may not integrate with the ERP system. It's a good question. Other questions? Okay, let's wrap this up real quick. PM, plant maintenance. This gets back to what was mentioned before. This is not asset management. Plant maintenance here is we have a fleet of trucks. Those fleet of trucks all periodically need oil changes. If we don't give the trucks the oil changes they need when they need them, they may stop being trucks. We have equipment in the plant that periodically needs to have its belts changed, that needs to have lubricant applied, that needs to in some way participate in routine maintenance. We can set all of that up in plant maintenance. And the nice thing about that is maybe, for example, every 6 months we have to change the belts on this piece of equipment on the shop floor. Well, if we set that up in plant maintenance, then 2 weeks before we're supposed to do the maintenance, the system will automatically order the belts and hoses and other things that we need as a part of its automated processing. You're used to, from your ERP SIM experience, the idea of we can put sales forecasts into the system and it can generate for us purchase orders. Well, other modules have the ability to generate automatic purchasing for us, and plant maintenance would be an example of that. If we set all this up in the system, then the system can not only order the materials that are needed, but actually schedule the jobs of our maintenance people. And I had one student in the past, this is probably going back 3 or 4 years ago, that worked in maintenance for a company in this area that ran SAP ERP. And when he came in the morning, he logged into the SAP ERP system and found out what his assigned jobs were for the day. And he would get that information from the system, go do the first job, come back, tell the system that he was finished, tell it what resources he used, and then move on to the next job. And everything about his daily workflow was managed based on what the system told him was needed. There's also, of course, the ability here for if something breaks, someone can put that into the system and it goes into the maintenance routine, you know, and is prioritized and triaged and all of that. So that is plant maintenance. The things that you're going to see here in green are all things that tend to relate to factory work and manufacturing. PM is plant maintenance. QM is quality management. And this has to do with things like inspecting the materials that we make to ensure that they match up with our quality standards. And it's very typical in manufacturing operations for one set of employees to make stuff and then another set of employees to be tasked with looking at what they have made and recording things like how many defects there are, what items need to be scrapped as opposed to sold to customers. The quality management module gives us the ability to do that if that's going to be part of our operation. PP is something that all of you have done in the context of ERP SIM, and that is production planning. Production planning is things like coming up with planned orders, sequencing production runs, basically everything associated with actually planning and executing the production process. You will sometimes see related to this another acronym, ME, which is manufacturing execution. So you'll sometimes see PPMM in proximity to one another, or excuse me, ME, because PP is the production planning part of it, ME is the manufacturing execution. MM is materials management. So this is bills of material, all of those kinds of things that relate to information tracked by the system related to raw materials, trading goods, finished goods, and all of those things that are essential to the operation of most organizations. And then the last one on this diagram, SD, is sales and distribution. Now, for the lab work that you are doing right now, you are largely working in the FICO set of modules. When you are creating your chart of accounts, you're setting up your business areas, you're defining your company code, all of that are key elements in financial accounting. When you're starting to create your cost center hierarchy and your cost groups and other things of that sort, now you're getting into cost accounting. And we will dig into what that means in much greater detail, probably in about another 2 or 3 class sessions. Comments or questions about this? All right, let's talk about one other foundational thing that at least somewhat relates to that and give you a few more acronyms to add to your repertoire. What is SAP Business Suite? Well, an analogy that I like to use is SAP ERP is to SAP Business Suite like Microsoft Word is to Microsoft Office. So let me say that again and then I'll explain. SAP ERP is to SAP Business Suite what Microsoft Word is to Microsoft Office. There are many companies that currently and historically have just licensed SAP ERP. SAP, of course, wants to sell their companies that run their software as many different products as they can. SAP ERP is focused on allowing a company to execute their internal business processes as effectively as they possibly can. But there are other extensions to that that many companies would find useful. For example, sometimes companies want additional customer relationship management software. This would be software that would allow salespeople to keep better track of customers. It would allow companies to plan advertising campaigns. It would allow a company, for example, that engages in direct mail to know what promotions they have offered to what customers during what times of the year. It would allow them to track what promotional campaigns were effective versus not effective. It would allow them basically to manage all of the information related to their relationship with their customer. It would also allow them to provide, and I don't know how to draw a computer, so let's just assume that this box here is a computer. It also provides functionality to allow our company to hook up its computer systems with our customers' computer systems for the sake of things like automated ordering. So if we wanted to allow our customers to hook their system up directly to ours so that their purchase orders just go directly into our system. That is not a core feature of SAP ERP, but if we employ the CRM module, we get that functionality. So it's kind of an added on feature that is a part of this overall environment. Kind of the corollary to that, SRM is supplier relationship management. So whereas customer relationship management is focused on our relationship with our customer, supplier relationship management is focused on our relationship with our supplier. So this would allow us to do things like automate our ordering with our supplier, to track additional information about our suppliers that is not a part of the core ERP system. So it is not at all unusual for a company to run SAP ERP as kind of the heart of their system, and then also run CRM and SRM to provide additional functionality. Before I give you the last two, the idea here is everything that's on the screen here is what you get if you buy SAP Business Suite. So just like you could go out and just buy Microsoft Word, you could alternately buy Microsoft Office and get a bundle of things. And just like the way that plays out for a lot of customers, they might say, well, I could buy Microsoft Word for $100, but I also need PowerPoint. And if I buy PowerPoint by itself, that's another $100. Or I could buy SAP Business Suite for $175 or $225. I'll just buy the whole Microsoft Office. So what SAP tries to do is make it so that their customers don't buy just SAP ERP. They want you to buy the whole business suite and get access to all of these tools. Yes?
Are each one of these different graphical interfaces, or is it just new transactions that you're able to go into?
The latter. It's new functionality that will be deployed dominantly through the SAP GUI, but I'm going to also talk about something that will modify that answer here in a moment. But yes, all of this to the typical employee would be totally transparent. It's just adding new transactions to the system. PLM, I actually talked about this previously. This is product lifecycle management. So there is some, with all of these things, there is some supplier relationship management built into the ERP system. There is some CRM built into the ERP system. But when you buy the business suite, you get more. You get more transactions, you get more functionality. With the product lifecycle management module, you're getting more ability to manage product blueprints, product schematics, just all of the things related to product design. SCM is supply chain management. Now, there are elements of this that, kind of tread a little bit on supplier relationship management and customer relationship management, but the idea behind supply chain management is just our relationship with all of our business partners and making that as smooth as we possibly can, making it as efficient as we possibly can, managing our entire supply chain efficiently is the focus of supply chain management. Now, the key here is all of these things, just like we were just talking about, when I install them, they become transparent to the end user. It's not like Microsoft Office where this is Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Access. It's more like if you logged into one Microsoft Office interface, and you could say, I need a presentation, and so it launches the slide functionality, and you say, I need to crunch some numbers, and it would launch the spreadsheet functionality. So it presents itself as one unified application to the end user, and that's because of this guy down here that we will probably talk about, if not in more detail later today, then definitely we will talk about this on Tuesday. SAP NetWeaver is the unifying foundation that allows all SAP products to seamlessly interconnect with one another. It also allows other products from other vendors to connect to and communicate with these systems. The best example I can give you of this is if you use Microsoft Office with regularity, you know that you could take, let's say, a spreadsheet and Control-C and then go into PowerPoint and Control-V and paste a spreadsheet into a PowerPoint slide. And you can very easily move information between the Office applications using the clipboard, Control-C, Control-V, copy, paste, that kind of thing. Well, that's because under the hood, all of those applications have the ability to communicate and share information with one another. That's what SAP NetWeaver does in an enterprise information systems context. It almost functions like an operating system. Now, it is not an operating system, but it is the layer between the operating system and all of these applications. So typically what a company will do is when they're establishing a new SAP infrastructure, the first thing they will install is NetWeaver. And then they will install all of the other applications on top of it and use NetWeaver as the vehicle to manage their interaction with one another. It's something that's totally transparent to the end user, but from a system administration point of view, there are lots of jobs out there for NetWeaver administrators. And those are jobs that would be the SAP equivalent of like a database administrator or a system administrator. You do a lot of performance tuning, you do a lot of keeping the system up and running through the functionality of NetWeaver. Any questions about that? There's one last thing I want to talk about, and then we will be done with this initial set of discussions. How is it that in this area, Eastman Chemical can run SAP ERP, Moly, which makes racing parts and automobile parts, can run SAP ERP, Oak Ridge National Laboratories, which does research and at least at some point in their history has engaged in things like making weaponry. I don't know what they do now because a lot of what they do is still secretive government contracts. How is it that you could have three businesses that do three very, very different things, but yet all do it through the same software? How is that possible? That is possible through what SAP has created called SAP Best Practices. Now the key is here, this is best practices with a capital B and a capital P, as opposed to just the generic term best practices, which means, hey, we found the best way to do something. SAP Best Practices is the idea that I install SAP ERP, and then I say to myself, I am in the banking industry. So I download from SAP the banking best practices and install it. And that updates my transactions, updates my menus, and tunes my system for the work that I do in the banking industry. Now, my employees may still use the SAP GUI. They may still run a lot of the same transactions that people do in other industries, but I'm going to pick up new transactions. I'm going to pick up different terminology. The system is going to be set up for me because I'm in the banking industry. Another organization, they may do retail, and SAP Best Practices would tune their system for engaging in retail. one of the things that some of you perhaps have heard me mention before, it's not per se an example of best practices, but Apple's iTunes is an SAP ERP application. That's what they use for all of the transaction processing. So when you go into either the App Store or iTunes and buy an app or buy a song or an album, that transaction is actually processed through SAP ERP automatically. Well, that's going to be different functionality than somebody who works in the mining industry would need out of their system. So what SAP did very, very early in the history of their company, and this is really quite notable, they had this idea of we need to create software that a lot of different companies could use. So they created their ERP framework, and they started selling it to customers, and customers started saying, you know, this is great, but this is really generic. We need something that is particular for our industry. And so what SAP did was something very forward-looking. And among the earliest industries here in the U.S. to do this was the chemical industry. And in fact, in the chemical industry, we're talking about Dow and Eastman being two of the major players here. What they actually did is they said, okay, Eastman Chemical, we agree. We need better functionality for chemicals. Can we send some of our employees to work in your facility with your people? Can you give them an office? You know, plan on them being there 6 months, a year, 2 years. Tell them, you know, don't tell them your company secrets or anything proprietary, but educate them as to the needs of your functionality. They'll work with you. They'll develop chemical industry functionality, and we'll package it into these best practices for the chemical industry. And they literally embedded employees in all of these different kinds of businesses to help create these specialized packages organized around best practices. SAP still does that. I have a friend who works for a company in this area that right now SAP is working on their S4 release. They invited him to spend the summer with them in Germany working with the S4 developers, as long as he would share with the S4 developers the needs of his particular industry. So he got to spend about 90 days in Germany this summer. He had a really, really great time, and he got to work right there in the same room and communicate with the developers that were creating this software. So SAP really does believe in having this kind of close relationship with their customers, and so they will say that that's one of the things that they can offer is, you know, if you're a brand new pharmaceutical company, you can buy this set of best practices that have emerged from their knowledge and their work with other companies in the pharmaceutical industry, and it will allow you to better adjust the functionality of the system to your particular needs. You will notice that not every industry is referenced here. And let me, because I do tell a lot of stories that are very pro-SAP, let me give you a bad SAP story. A number of years ago, SAP was courting a new customer here in the U.S. called Waste Management. Waste Management, I think they have a presence here in the Tri-Cities area, but they're not as big as they are in other parts of this country. They do the very glorious job of picking up dumpsters and picking up trash, and they have the big green waste management trucks. They're one of this country's largest not suppliers, but gatherers, I guess, of waste products and managing landfills and things of that sort. SAP wanted them to become an SAP customer. But Waste Management said, okay, we're looking at your best practices here, and you don't have any best practices related to what we do. And SAP said, okay, well, we want to learn about your practices, so will you sign a contract to be one of our customers, pay us X millions of dollars, and we will have some developers come in, we'll work with you, and we will adapt SAP ERP to your needs. And Waste Management said, great, here's a bucket of money, very, very large bucket of money, and we are looking forward to this partnership. Time goes by. Of course, the contract specifies certain date milestones, like by such and such a date, we'll be able to start using this functionality. And at one point in this process, SAP went in and did a demo of a hypothetical system. Now, for those of you that are computing students in here, you are well aware of the concept of prototyping and I want to make sure my mic was right. Prototyping and doing a customer demo where what you're demonstrating is an example of functionality to come, but it's not yet ready for customers to actually use right then. So they did a demo. The waste management people were all excited. They were like, that's what we want. Time goes by. The deadline arrives. SAP says, we don't have your software yet. We're still working on it. 6 more months pass. SAP, the equivalent of the dog ate my homework. We don't have it. Waste Management starts saying, okay, you're making us really nervous. We're now like a year past the deadline here. What's going on? And so the lawyers started getting involved, and there was some saber rattling back and forth. And at one point, Waste Management said, we want to see that demo that you did again. That demo you did for our executives a year ago, come back in and show it to us again, and let's compare that to what you have now. And SAP said, we can no longer locate that demo. It's gone. We cannot find it anywhere. We can create a new demo, but the old demo and all of that functionality is just forget that ever existed because it's gone. That did not make Waste Management happy. Well, suffice it to say, Waste Management ultimately got very, very frustrated and sued SAP, alleging that SAP said they were going to develop best practices by a certain deadline. They did not do that, nor could they demonstrate that they were even close to Waste Management satisfaction. So what happened, as in most lawsuits of this sort, there were some preliminary hearings, there were some depositions, and ultimately SAP paid Waste Management money to go away and to drop their lawsuit. So this is an example of a scenario where SAP promised to develop best practices and had a partner, but it did not work out all rainbows and sunshine and everything else. There was a lot of angst about this, and although this is now several years in the past, you could still Google SAP Waste Management lawsuit and find some very, very interesting articles about the statements. Because what basically happened is what always happens in this situation. Waste Management blamed SAP, and SAP blamed Waste Management. And neither one of them wanted to take responsibility. They both said it was the other one's fault, and rather than drag it into a court of law, SAP just wound up paying them to go away. That is the end of our first discussion here, which all fell under the umbrella of Introduction to Business Processes.